All right, welcome back. Now, today is one of our TNA Breakfast Briefing, and the focus is on state-owned enterprises communications, which is a key driver towards building a developmental state. Let's say good morning to Peter and his guest. Peter, it's a very good morning to you.
A very good morning to you, Palesa, and good morning to all of you at home, wherever you may be watching across the continent, on Channel 404 and DSTV, and also on SABC2 on our program Morning Live. Yeah, today, this is the most recent of the New Age Business Briefings brought to you by the SABC, and today very kindly sponsored by Transnet. And today we're focusing on a subject that perhaps we haven't talked about before, but one that you probably would have interacted with in one form or another somewhere along the line. We're looking at state-owned entities, and I got quite an interesting statistic shared with me today. 717 state-owned entities. Did you know that? That's how many SOEs that you are a shareholder in. And we're going to be talking a little bit about what they're doing. They function at local, provincial, and national level. What are they doing? How much do we know about them? Is it because you're not paying attention, or is it because they're not communicating their message properly? Or is it getting lost in translation by the time it gets to the media? Well, to unpack this, I have a panel of members that are involved in this organization. And let me start with Mr. Congress Mahlangu, who's the president of the State-Owned Entities Communicators Association. Thank you very much for joining us, and welcome to you.
Thank you very much, sir.
Next to you, we have the SOEPF Advisory Board Chairperson, Mr. Kamkhelo Mampane. Thank you very much for joining us. Welcome to you. And next to you, somebody that I think our viewers might be familiar with, the Head of Group Communications at the SABC, Mr. Kaiser Khanyako. Thank you very much for joining us, and welcome to you. Great. All right. So let me start with you then, Congress. 3 or so years ago, there was this idea to bring into being the State-Owned Entities Communicators Association. Why? What's the need?
Thank you very much, Peter. I think our main thrust of looking at this particular structure was we did an assessment. We asked ourselves a fundamental question amongst communicators within the SOEs. We said prior to 1994, you had about 300 SOEs. And little do we know that post-democracy, in the new democratic state, we then have about 717 SOEs. They mushroom immediately. So all of them had a specific desire to achieve. And all of them have got communicators throughout the whole country. But then you realize that the message is not consistent in terms of the national agenda of the country. Maybe political agenda, maybe development agenda and economic agenda of a country. So you need to ensure that there's a proper alignment in terms of ensuring that this particular institution speaks in the same hymn book. Now we decided to sit down and say, given this particular view, that we have all this SOE and there's a lack of alignment, and members of communicators are not a homogeneous group. They're all of different expertise at a different level. And to coordinate them, it requires that particular coherency in terms of building them. But we also said to ourselves, we need a proper skillings and empowering of communicators so that they can become better communicators out there. It's unfortunate that most of the time, SOEs, they found themselves in a serious predicament. They're always in the media for all wrong reasons. And it's unfortunate that this particular institution has been created deliberately as a service delivery arm of the government. We are sitting here with a country which has got a massive unemployment. And these institutions have to take care. They are not a panacea, but they are one of the strategic tools through which they can enable other institutions in this country to able to forge ahead in terms of the developmental aspiration. Then Suka responded to that question. Members said to ourselves, there's a need for communicating these particular messages. Policies come, policies and go. And you can ask yourself, how many policies this particular government put into place? And all those particular policies disappear like mist in the morning, because of lack of adequate communication, so that these particular messages resonate well with the people that they intend to serve. So that's why Suka is here. And today, it marks the revolutionizing of communication industry. We ask ourselves a fundamental and very pressing question among communicators to say, it can't be business as usual. We can't see every issue that is taking place out there as an issue of a scandal, issue of corruption. We're saying we need to convey and communicate consistent and constructive message and a development message that will be able to assist ourselves. Hence, SOCA is here. Unfortunately, members of communicators throughout the country, I think we cover broadly from national level, provincial and local level. And that has been quite very active, and our members of SOCA, and particularly the CEOs and the board and board members have welcomed this particular initiative. But let me hasten also to add that I think we derive our inspirations from the GCIS, which has been quite a pillar in terms of supporting this particular initiative, in terms of constructing this thinking amongst all the communicators. As I said earlier on, communicators are not a homogeneous group. It's very difficult to manage them because they've got different opinions and they want their voice to be heard, sometimes not their ideas, which is very unfortunate. So we are trying to make sure that we forge ahead to make sure that we created this consistent team of our members. We have an executive member, which is comprised of all most of the communicators, which cut across from the national level. We have made sure that we have set a balanced team of communicators in the executive so that they are represented from national, from provincial to local level. So SOCA was established in 2014, November, and I think we're here today to celebrate some of the gains that it's making. And it's making a massive traction.
All right, we're going to unpack some of those gains and how things have improved. Let me turn to you, Kamkhelo. You are the State-Owned Entities Procurement Forum. That's what SOEPF stands for, Advisory Board Chairman. How do you fit into this equation?
Yeah, that's quite an interesting question. When the President had this idea, State-Owned Entity Procurement Forum started a few years before the SOCA, and we invited the communicators to assist us in communicating the work that has been done in state-owned entities, especially in the procurement forum. As we all know that while we understand philosophically that we live in a developmental state, and the developmental agenda, especially in terms of growth and development, is also been driven hardly through the spend, the procurement of goods and services. So when state-owned entities procurement forum was started at the dawn of democracy, the procurement spend was sitting at about 340 billion. We are now sitting at about 500 billion of procurement of goods and services. And you can imagine that if that particular spend was not directed to make sure that we drive growth, we drive development, we drive transformation, you can see what happened. When in 1994, South Africa was not the country that had the biggest gap between the rich and the poor. But somehow, over the years, even though we had about 2% of economic growth, and the budget has grown quite drastically, almost doubled in terms of procurement of goods and services, we have actually made use of the government spend to re-entrench the legacies of apartheid. And it's a very sad statement to say, because as professionals within state-owned entities, we really struggle to make sure that we direct that particular spend to grow SMMEs, for example, to grow our economy, to even start new industries. So there's a whole lot of work that has been done in terms of also influencing legislation, especially from the Department of Trade and Industry, as our secretariat. So with that angle, while all this work has been done and continues to be driven, especially by SUF ESCO, none of those things have been communicated. So over the years, we can tell stories about new companies, new black-owned companies that we've started, new industries that have started, and the work that has also been done in different government institutions, like the Presidential Review on State-Owned Entities. That PRC report that has been published, there's a huge section that has been written there for communication and also about procurement and the need of procurement to consolidate the spend. But that work is not being communicated. Of course, we are not communicators, and hence we engaged with the president at the time to be that lever that will communicate all the work that has been done, and not only that, because communication in my mind should go beyond just sharing information, but it should also go to an extent where it influences the mind and the works of the people in the state-owned entities. So if procurement people that are sitting anywhere in those more than 700 state-owned entities, they don't know how to direct that particular spend to drive a developmental agenda, because we'll never get to all of them. And then I think that's a given, which we are accepting. But communication should be helping them at that particular space to say, how am I going to make sure that this spend is directed to transformation, to drive development, and to SMMEs? Because our policies, for all these 22 years, we never had a policy in government, in the whole of government, in the whole of South Africa, with brilliant constitution that gives effect to Section 1, 2, and 7 of our constitution. Well, we always talk about Section 1, but Section 2B talks about redress. So we've never had a policy that says, how am I going to direct this particular spend, this 500 billion to SMMEs? Now, probably in the next few weeks, from the 1st of April, we might have such a policy. So people that are sitting in different areas, they needed that message to be driven to them, but also to the community at large.
Okay. Mr. Kganyago, you are head of communications at one of these SOEs, and the challenge that I'm hearing is not all of these things are being communicated. Does that mean you're not doing your job?
Very interesting one. Communicators all over the state-owned institutions believe that they are doing a good job. But the issue has always been about professionalization of the communication. Because in most of these organizations, communication is only thought of when there is a crisis. When there's no crisis, people don't believe that we need to communicate. And a lot of people in senior management in organizations think that communication is equivalent to speaking. Because you can be able to speak, but you are not a communicator. Communicator must be in a position to communicate messages in a way that the audience out there are able to receive. Therefore, from where I'm sitting, communication needs to be taken seriously in organizations. And I can tell you, if you can go around in most of the organizations, you'll find that communicators or spokespersons of the organization are not even sitting at EXCO. And you are expected to sit in an interview where you're going to be asked questions about how this decision was made. If you are in a position where you are sitting and you are told about a decision, how are you going to be able to defend that decision? That is why the message then at the end get lost in between. And from where I'm sitting, all that SUKA needs to focus on is to make sure that positions that are held by communicators in state-owned institutions are in the right position. They sit in board meetings, they sit in Group X committees, and they are given enough latitude to be on an advisory level. Because sometimes when decisions are made, people need to understand that after you make the decision, what are the communication implications? Therefore, at that point, you are able to alter your decision when you know the implication, and communicators need to be given that latitude. And once that is done, we will be able to communicate much better.
All right, it's interesting, and we'll pick up on that a little bit more, because I would imagine that the principals right at the top of this chain are the ones that probably need to drive down the kind of policies to get this uniformity, and also to put the communicators in their right level. Let me come back to you, Congress, because we need to talk about progress. I'm going to quote Minister Faith Mutambi, who said, it seems that, and she says what? She says, you need to be doing more with the communications process. It seems that you are preoccupied these days with putting out fires. Now, she said that 3 years ago at the launch of SUKA. And yet she could have been saying that today. So how much progress have we made then in 3 years?
Yeah, I think, Peter, one of the serious challenges that I think we have made an observation over the past, I think, 2 years, it's a lack of this coherence amongst communicators. And that has been a serious challenge. And safe to say that the interpretation of what the minister was saying, I think the minister makes a well thought of idea, and he says to us, guys, if you have to go out there and begin to communicate in the consistent way, you'll be able to deliver a message, especially the message that is advocated within the National Development Plan. Now, I want to bring this particular issue as an attempt to respond to that question. That we have directives from the government, and one of the directives speaks to the question of the set aside of about 30% of ad spend to community media. Communicators often, when they think of communication and using communication tools, they think mostly of those commercial media. They'll be running to other publications and other media streams and forget the key element, which is the core where the foundation of democracy is established, which is community media. And that set aside was clearly communicated to say 30% of 30% of ad spend should go to community media. And to our surprise and dismay, very few institutions have taken that particular mandate and responded to it adequately. And as SUCA, we have advocated for our members, and we are busy working on a dashboard to make a determination in terms of which institutions are complying to that mandate. And we want to make sure that we also benchmark with the best practices. I can assure you, within the SOE, there are best communicators. You look at ESCOMs, in as much as there are challenges, but you have best communicators in that particular institution. They communicate messages unambiguous. There's no ambivalence in terms of how they communicate. You look at SABC, it has challenged, but communicators are doing their bit of work. And it goes to other institutions. And the second point that I want to also raise is how communicators respond to the national developmental imperatives of the country. For instance, you have the Use of Language Act of 1912, Act 2012, which speaks about language parity. How many institutions and SOE seated here are able to comply to language parity? Because one of the fundamental principle and layer of communication is to communicate to our own citizens in the language that they understand and the language that they appreciate. We go there and posture and claim that we are communicating to our people. And when people are protesting, demanding the proper service, and we claim that we have communicated when we're talking to ourselves. So using proper and best instrument is one of the fundamental keys. And SUCA has been urging all its members to make sure that they begin to comply and respond to these issues.
Why haven't they been doing it?
Well, the other challenge is one is that we are engaging members we are engaging our members from the CEO level, because it has been a challenging. I think one of the serious impediments of communicators in general, they've got a silo mentality. They operate in their own space. For instance, it's so difficult that we are operating within the DFIs. DFIs, development finance institutions. We are in the same space, you are in the land bank, you are in the IDC. But those individuals, they can share communication strategy, basic document, a very easy document that assists in terms of how we communicate, because they are territorial. And that's a chain that we want to break. To say, we are the state-owned entities. We are not some form of a false start or running. We are not an independent institution. Our existence is desired by the government. We therefore have to respond to the government imperatives. So these are some of the areas that I think SUCA has managed to put into the table. And members are coming on board. And I'm certain that within the growth of SUCA, we'll be able to see the different change. And one of the other elements that I need to also emphasize is the fact that the flow of communication from the government and from SOEs is quite at a very tangent level. Now we need to make sure that we bring closer that particular element. We have a spokesperson who speaks on behalf of the government, speak about the same issue that is affecting the SOE as a shareholder, and we get conflicting messages in terms of how to communicate. You get the information that layer is not consistent. So we need to make sure that we create sustainable form of communication system. That's a level of professionalism that we want to instill amongst our members.
Mr. Mampane, how is it that these members are not procuring in the way that they've been advised, this 30%? Are you not advising them? Are they not hearing you? What's going wrong?
And then that's why this, this marriage came into being, because these policies you cannot implement if there's no policy. The president makes statements about targeting certain sectors like community media. Other minister made a statement about targeting a certain spend to SMMEs. The problem is if you don't have a policy that drives it, it's only left to the will of CEOs and executives in those SOEs to implement the policy. And when they try to implement the policy, I assure you we have so many cases where state-owned companies and government departments have been sent to the courts to challenge those ideas. Because unless there is a policy that supports that statement, it's very unfortunate that you hear that statement said by the president, said by different ministers, but there's no policy that's going to drive it. And once that policy is not there, unfortunately, you are going to report the president here to that the spend that is directed to community media is irregular or is a fruitless and a wasteful expenditure. And we don't want that. So the mandate of State-Owned Entity Procurement Forum was to also advise people that sit in policy to write the policies that can drive that particular agenda. And of course, as I said, one policy which is coming into in place this time driven by the National Treasury, because the current regulation, PPPFA, did not empower. You couldn't use PPPFA to drive this particular agenda. Whether it's SMME, whether it's community media, whether it's black-owned company, you couldn't drive it. You couldn't even buy, for example, if we want to appoint SABC as a partner for any other state company, they must go out to bid. They must compete with anybody else. If you want to buy from a state organ, they must participate in a bid process. So the policies do not support this developmental agenda. But we are really hoping that some of the policy levers that have been amended are going to give this policy objectives effect.
Okay, we have to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll continue to explore this, and I'm looking forward to your tweets as well. Hashtag TNA BizBrief at Morning Live SABC, and we also have an audience here that are going to be contributing. Join us for that conversation after this.